The world swam in and out of focus, a dizzying kaleidoscope of blurred lights and distorted sounds. A strangled cry escaped her lips, a desperate plea lost in the echoing vastness of the unknown space. Ran, help me, she choked out, the words thick and slurred, hurry, I've been drugged. Her voice, usually crisp and sharp, was now a fragile whisper, a testament to the insidious poison coursing through her veins. Fear, raw and primal, clawed at her insides. She tried to move, to push herself away from the unseen threat, but her limbs were leaden, unresponsive to her commands. Each breath was a struggle, each heartbeat a painful thud against her ribs. Think, Ran, think, she urged herself, her thoughts as fragmented as the images before her eyes. Where are you? Who did this? A wave of nausea swept over her, and she retched, the bitter taste of bile rising in her throat. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the swirling chaos, to anchor herself to some semblance of reality. Shunning. The thought flickered through her mind, a venomous suspicion taking root. Her half-sister's envious gaze, the subtle jabs, the constant undercurrent of competition, it all pointed to a carefully orchestrated betrayal. A hand touched her shoulder, and she flinched, recoiling as if burned. Don't touch me, she hissed, her voice laced with panic. She thrashed weakly, a trapped animal desperate for escape. The world tilted precariously, and she felt herself falling, only to be caught by strong arms. Let me go, she cried, her voice cracking. The scent of sandalwood and something subtly metallic, like the tang of rain on steel, filled her nostrils. A familiar scent, unsettlingly familiar. The fog in her mind began to clear, the distorted images coalescing into recognizable shapes. And then she saw him. Han Yu. Her fiancé. Or rather, the man she was being forced to marry. The realization hit her like a physical blow. He's behind this. The thought was a chilling whisper in the back of her mind. All the pieces clicked into place, the forced engagement, the sudden illness, the insistent pressure from both families. It was a trap, a meticulously crafted cage designed to bind her to a life she didn't want. Ran, it's me, Han Yu's voice was low and steady, a stark contrast to the frantic beating of her heart. His touch, though firm, was strangely gentle. He was holding her upright, supporting her weight as her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man who was supposed to be her savior was the very architect of her downfall. I need help, she mumbled, the fight draining out of her. The words tasted like ash in her mouth, an admission of defeat she hadn't intended to make. A strange vulnerability washed over her, a stark contrast to the anger and defiance that had simmered within her just moments ago. The drug was still working its way through her system, stripping away her defenses, leaving her exposed and raw. Don't trust him, a voice screamed in her head. He's lying. Yet, a part of her, a small, treacherous part, craved the comfort of his touch, the reassurance in his voice. Han Yu's gaze was intense, searching. I know, he said softly, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. The gesture was unexpectedly intimate, sending a shiver down her spine. I know you've been drugged. His words were a confirmation of her worst fears, yet there was something in his tone, a subtle undercurrent of concern. It was impossible. He was playing a part, manipulating her, just like everyone else. But why? What did he gain from this charade? Han Yu, she began, her voice trembling, why? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken accusations. He looked away, his jaw tightening. The silence stretched, thick with tension. He didn't answer. And in that silence, Ran found her answer. He was complicit. A cold wave of despair washed over her. She had been so foolish, so naive to believe that she could escape this web of deceit. A sudden commotion broke the tense silence. Voices, raised in alarm, echoed from a distance. Footsteps pounded down the hallway, growing closer with each passing second. Han Yu's expression hardened, a mask of determination replacing the fleeting vulnerability she had glimpsed earlier. He scooped her into his arms, his movements swift and decisive. "We have to go," he said, his voice tight with urgency. Ran clung to him, her body weak and trembling. She had no other choice. He carried her through a labyrinth of corridors, his pace quickening as the sounds of pursuit grew louder. "Where is he taking me?" She wondered, her mind racing. Was this another part of his plan? Another layer of the trap? Or was he truly trying to protect her? The uncertainty gnawed at her, a constant, unsettling hum beneath the surface of her fear. They burst out into the cool night air, the sudden change in temperature sending a shiver down her spine. A car was waiting, its engine idling softly. Han Yu deposited her gently onto the back seat, then slid in beside her, slamming the door shut. The car sped away, leaving the chaos and confusion behind. Ran leaned back against the cool leather, closing her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her like a heavy blanket. She felt adrift, lost in a sea of uncertainty. Who could she trust? Where could she turn? Suddenly, a memory flickered in her mind, a forgotten fragment from her childhood. Her grandmother's wrinkled face, her warm embrace, the whispered words, "You are a Zhou, Ran." Never forget that. The words, once meaningless, now resonated with a newfound power. She was a Zhou. Heiress to a fortune, a power player in a world she had never known. A slow smile spread across her face, a glimmer of hope igniting in her weary heart. "They underestimate me," she thought, her eyes snapping open. "They all do." She looked at Han Yu, his profile sharp and defined in the dim light of the car. He was still an enigma, his motives unclear. But one thing was certain, she would use this newfound knowledge, this hidden identity, to regain control of her life, to expose the truth, and to exact her revenge. The game had just begun. The biting chill of the night air seeped through the thin fabric of her dress, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat that had pulsed through her veins just moments ago. The drug, whatever it had been, was beginning to loosen its grip, leaving behind a disorienting echo of unreality. Her head throbbed, a dull, insistent drumbeat against her temples. Where was she? A strange room, dimly lit, the furnishings unfamiliar and shrouded in shadows. The lingering scent of sandalwood incense hung heavy in the air, clinging to the back of her throat like a phantom touch. He was there, too, the man who had drugged her, the man who her thoughts fractured, the memory a jagged piece of glass reflecting distorted images. Fear, sharp and cold, pricked at her skin, urging her to flee. But her limbs felt weighted, sluggish, as though wading through thick mud. He stirred, a low groan escaping his lips. He was still groggy, disoriented, the drug's lingering effects mirroring her own. An opportunity. The thought flickered in her mind, a tiny spark in the overwhelming darkness. He reached out, his hand fumbling towards her. A wave of nausea washed over her. No. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening again. With a surge of adrenaline, she twisted away, scrambling back until her spine pressed against the cold, hard wall. The rough surface grounded her, a tangible anchor in the swirling chaos of her mind. "What are you doing?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. He blinked, his eyes struggling to focus. Ran's breath hitched in her throat. He looked different. Vulnerable, even. The predatory gleam that had chilled her to the bone was gone, replaced by a confused bewilderment that mirrored her own. Could it be the drug? Or was there something more beneath the surface? A flicker of something cold and calculating sparked in Ran's eyes. She wouldn't be a victim. Not again. Not ever. "Don't worry," she said, her voice a low, steady murmur, each word carefully measured. "I'll take responsibility." The words hung in the air, heavy with an unspoken meaning. His brow furrowed, confusion etched on his face. Responsibility? For what? Her gaze, however, was fixed on the silken cord that lay discarded on the floor, likely used to tie her. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She reached for it, her fingers closing around the smooth fabric. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "Drugged and now you're all over me," he slurred, his words laced with a hint of accusation. He attempted to sit up, but his movements were clumsy, uncoordinated. A bitter smile touched Ranran's lips. The tables had turned. "Watch me tie you up," she countered, her voice laced with a chilling calm. His eyes widened, a flicker of fear igniting in their depths. He tried to protest, to struggle, but it was too late. With practiced efficiency, she bound his wrists, the silken cord biting into his skin. He stared at her, disbelief etched on his features. How? When? The questions swirled in his eyes, unspoken yet palpable. Ranran met his gaze, her own eyes unwavering. A wave of dizziness washed over her, a reminder of the drug's lingering effects. She leaned against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had to get out of here. She had to think. Plan. Her mind raced, sifting through the fragmented memories, searching for clues, for answers. Who was this man? Why had he drugged her? And where was she? Each question was a thorn, digging deeper into the raw wound of her confusion. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but now it was mingled with something else. Anger. A burning, righteous anger that fueled her resolve. She wouldn't be broken. She wouldn't be silenced. She would find out the truth, no matter the cost. She pushed herself away from the wall, ignoring the lingering dizziness. She needed to search this place, find something, anything, that could shed light on her situation. As she moved, a small, intricately carved wooden box caught her eye. It sat on a low table, partially hidden beneath a silk scarf. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, a strange premonition tightening her chest. She opened the box, and her breath caught in her throat. Inside, nestled on a bed of crimson velvet, lay a jade pendant, its surface cool and smooth against her fingertips. The pendant was familiar, hauntingly so. She had seen it before, in a photograph of her grandmother. The memory, sharp and clear, pierced through the fog of the drug. Her grandmother, the Zhou family. The pieces began to click into place, forming a horrifying, yet strangely empowering picture. The forced engagement, she shunning it all made sense. She wasn't Chi Ranran, not anymore. She was Zhou Ranran, the long-lost granddaughter of the Zhou Empire. A slow smile spread across her face, a smile that held no warmth, only a chilling determination. She looked at the bound figure on the floor, his eyes fixed on her, filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. He was Han Yu, the man she was supposed to marry. The man her family had sold her to. The man who had drugged her. Irony, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. She closed the box, the jade pendant cool against her palm. It was a symbol, a weapon. And she knew exactly how to use it. The game had changed. She wasn't the pawn anymore. She was the player. And she was ready to play. The low hum of the refrigerator was the only sound punctuating the suffocating silence of the apartment. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid sloshing against the crystal, mirroring the turbulent thoughts swirling in his mind. The ice clinked, a sharp, brittle sound that grated on his already frayed nerves. He hadn't anticipated the evening unfolding this way. Not at all. No idea if I can trick Chi Ran Ran into drinking it. That person is really sharp. The words, spoken earlier by his brother, Xiaofei, echoed in his ears, tinged with a condescending amusement that now tasted like ash in his mouth. He'd scoffed then, confident in his own ability to manipulate the situation. He'd underestimated her. Grossly. He swirled the whiskey, watching the light refract through the glass, casting distorted patterns on the polished countertop. He remembered the way she'd held the glass, her fingers slender and elegant against the crystal, her gaze steady, assessing. A flicker of suspicion had crossed her features, so fleeting he almost dismissed it. Almost. She knew something was amiss. The thought settled heavily in his gut, a cold knot of unease. He'd masked it well, he thought, the slight tremor in his hand as he offered her the drink, the forced casualness of his tone. He'd practiced the scene countless times in his head, each word, each gesture meticulously crafted to project an air of innocent concern. Yet, she'd seen through it. Or perhaps, sensed it. A primal instinct, a woman's intuition, warning her of the danger lurking beneath the surface of polite smiles and empty pleasantries. He took a long swallow of the whiskey, the burn a welcome distraction from the turmoil within. He hadn't wanted to do it. This wasn't him. This wasn't how he envisioned their first meeting, certainly not how he'd imagined spending the evening. He'd imagined conversation, laughter, perhaps a shared appreciation for the city lights twinkling outside the panoramic window. He'd imagined seeing her genuine smile, not the forced politeness that had preceded her swift, unexpected escape. He closed his eyes, the image of her struggling against him, her eyes wide with fear and accusation, seared into his memory. He'd felt a pang of guilt, sharp and unexpected, a betrayal of his own principles. He wasn't a violent man. He wasn't his brother. He wasn't the callous, power-hungry puppet his family expected him to be. His family. The source of all his troubles. The architects of this elaborate charade. They'd pressured him, coerced him, dangling the promise of power and control in exchange for his compliance. Marry Chi Ran Ran, they'd said. Secure the Zhou family fortune. Cement the Han family's position at the top. They hadn't cared about the cost, the collateral damage, the human lives caught in their crosshairs. And he, weakened by years of emotional manipulation and a desperate desire for their approval, had succumbed. He'd allowed himself to become a pawn in their game, a tool to be used and discarded. He'd convinced himself it was for the greater good, for the future of the Han Empire. But now, standing here in the oppressive silence of his apartment, the weight of his actions pressed down on him, suffocating him. He'd trapped Chi Ran Ran, a woman he barely knew, in a web of lies and deceit. He'd drugged her, violated her trust, and for what? For a fortune he didn't need, a power he didn't crave. The irony was bitter, twisting in his gut like a poisoned dagger. He'd been so focused on gaining control, he hadn't realized he'd lost it long ago. He was a prisoner of his family's expectations, a puppet dancing to their tune. And Chi Ran Ran, with her sharp mind and defiant spirit, had seen right through him. A sudden, sharp knock on the door startled him. He tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the glass, his knuckles white against the crystal. He hesitated, his mind racing. Who could it be at this hour? His brother? One of his father's men, come to check on the progress of their scheme. He set the glass down, his movements deliberate, trying to project an air of calm he didn't feel. He opened the door cautiously, his body braced for confrontation. It was old Zhou, Chi Ran Ran's grandfather. He stood there, his face etched with a mixture of anger and concern, his eyes burning with an intensity that made Han Yu flinch. Behind him, a phalanx of security personnel stood silently, their presence radiating an aura of power and authority. Where is she? Old Zhou's voice was low and dangerous, barely controlled fury simmering beneath the surface. Han Yu swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He could try to lie, to deny any involvement, but he knew it would be futile. Old Joe was not a man to be trifled with. He'd built his empire on shrewdness and ruthlessness, and he would not hesitate to crush anyone who threatened his family. "She's gone," Hanyu admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Old Joe's eyes narrowed, his gaze piercing Hanyu's defenses. "Gone? Where?" Hanyu hesitated, his mind racing. He could tell Old Joe the truth, admit to his role in the scheme, but the consequences would be devastating. His family would disown him, his reputation ruined. He'd be left with nothing. I don't know," he lied, the words tasting like acid on his tongue. He looked away, unable to meet Old Joe's gaze. He felt a surge of shame, a deep, visceral understanding of the damage he'd caused. "You don't know?" Old Joe's voice was laced with disbelief. He stepped closer, his presence filling the doorway, a looming shadow that threatened to engulf Hanyu. Hanyu braced himself for the inevitable explosion, the torrent of accusations and threats. But it never came. Instead, Old Joe sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. He looked at Hanyu, his gaze softening, a flicker of something akin to understanding in his eyes. "You're a fool, Hanyu," Old Joe said, his voice low and steady. "A fool to let them use you like this." He turned to leave, his security detail falling in behind him. As he reached the elevator, he paused, turning back to Hanyu, his eyes holding a strange mixture of pity and warning. "She's smarter than you think," he said, his voice barely audible above the hum of the elevator. "And she will have her revenge." The pale morning light, filtered through the dusty curtains, cast long shadows across Ranran's room, a stark contrast to the chaotic darkness that had enveloped her the previous night. The lingering scent of jasmine incense, usually a comfort, now seemed to mock her, a sickly sweet reminder of her vulnerability. Her head throbbed, a dull ache that resonated with the unsettling disquiet in her gut. Each breath was a conscious effort, her lungs feeling heavy, as though the remnants of the drug still clung to her. She pressed her fingertips to her temples, trying to massage away the throbbing, but the memory of the night, fragmented and terrifying, refused to dissipate. Had it been a dream? The forceful grip, the disorienting dizziness, the blurry image of a face Hanyu. The absurdity of it sent a shiver down her spine. Why would Hanyu, the sickly, withdrawn heir to the Han Corporation, drug and what? What had he intended? She pushed herself out of bed, the silk sheets cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the feverish heat that had consumed her just hours before. The mirror reflected a pale, disheveled version of herself, eyes shadowed with exhaustion and fear. "He wouldn't," she whispered to her reflection, the words barely audible, yet the denial felt hollow even to her own ears. The Han family's desperation for this marriage was no secret. Their company teetered on the brink of collapse, and an alliance with the Zhou Corporation, even through a marriage to an illegitimate granddaughter like herself, was their lifeline. But to resort to this? To drugging her? The thought left a bitter taste in her mouth. A sharp rap on the door startled her. "Ran. Are you awake?" Qi Shunning's voice, saccharine sweet as always, grated on her nerves. Ran took a deep breath, composing herself, pushing down the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. "Come in," she managed, her voice raspy. The door creaked open, and Qi Shunning entered, a picture of innocent concern. Ran, are you all right? You look terrible." Her eyes, however, held a glint of something else, something that resembled triumph. Ran's stomach clenched. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. "Shunning," Ran began, her voice low and steady, each word carefully chosen. "Do you know anything about what happened last night?" Qi Shunning's feigned concern faltered for a fraction of a second, a fleeting micro-expression that Ran didn't miss. What do you mean? What happened? She moved closer, her hand outstretched as if to comfort Ran, but Ran recoiled, a visceral reaction to the sudden suspicion that solidified within her. I was drugged, shunning, Ran stated, her gaze unwavering. And the last thing I remember is seeing Hanyu. A flicker of panic crossed Chi Shunning's face, quickly masked by a look of incredulous outrage. Hanyu? That's absurd. Why would he? Her voice trailed off, the question hanging in the air, unanswered. Why indeed? Ran echoed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Unless, of course, someone wanted to ensure that the marriage went ahead, no matter the cost. She watched Chi Shunning closely, her half-sister's every twitch and flicker of expression a confirmation of her growing suspicion. Shameless. Your dad was just buried yesterday, Chi Shunning's voice rose, shrill and accusatory. Chi Ran, drugged you, go to her. Why would I drug you to marry that sickly Hanyu for me? She took a step back, as if repulsed by the very idea. You're delusional. This is all in your head. Why would I want to marry Hanyu? It's you they want, not me. Ran laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. Really, Shunning? You think I'm blind to your ambition? Your constant maneuvering, your subtle manipulations. You've always resented me, haven't you? Resented me for being chosen, for having what you wanted. You're twisting everything. Chi Shunning shrieked, her composure finally cracking. I've done nothing. It's Hanyu, I tell you. He's obsessed with you, everyone knows it. The argument escalated, voices rising, accusations flying like daggers in the tense atmosphere of the room. The fragile facade of sisterly affection shattered, revealing the raw, ugly truth of their rivalry. The years of simmering resentment, fueled by jealousy and ambition, finally boiled over. Just then, a sharp knock echoed through the house, followed by the authoritative voice of old Joe. Ran. Are you in there? Ran's heart leaped. Her grandfather. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. She straightened, composing herself, a new sense of resolve hardening her gaze. This was her chance. Her chance to expose Chi Shunning's treachery and reclaim her future. She opened the door, revealing her grandfather, his face etched with concern. Behind him stood several men in dark suits, their presence adding a palpable weight to the already charged atmosphere. Chi Shunning paled, her eyes widening in alarm. Grandfather, Ran said, her voice calm and steady, belying the turmoil within. I have something important to tell you. She glanced at Chi Shunning, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. The game had changed. And she, Chi Ran, was finally holding all the cards. She had a secret weapon, a truth that would shift the power dynamics entirely. She was not just the illegitimate granddaughter, a pawn in their games. She was Zhou Hei's true heir, the granddaughter he had searched for relentlessly for years. And with that knowledge, she would rewrite her own narrative. Sunlight, sharp and unforgiving, sliced through the gaps in the curtains, painting stripes across the polished floor of Han Yu's study. He stood by the window, his back a rigid line, the city sprawling beneath him like a gray, indifferent beast. The cityscape, normally a source of quiet contemplation, held no interest for him today. His fingers, long and slender, tapped a restless rhythm against the cool glass. The events of the previous night, hazy and surreal, pressed against his consciousness like a suffocating shroud. He could still smell the sickly sweet scent of the drug, taste the metallic tang of fear on his tongue. A knock echoed through the room, pulling him from the mire of his thoughts. Enter, he commanded, his voice clipped and devoid of warmth. Two of his most trusted associates, Chen and Li, stepped into the study, their faces etched with a mixture of concern and apprehension. Han Yu turned to face them, his gaze sharp and assessing. He knew they wouldn't have disturbed him unless it was important. Something about their demeanor suggested this wasn't a routine report. He could practically taste the tension clinging to the air, thick and cloying. Chen cleared his throat, his gaze flitting nervously towards Li. "Boss," he began, his voice a low murmur, "the news about last night. It spread." He paused, as if hesitant to utter the words aloud. Han Yu's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He had anticipated this, yet the confirmation still felt like a punch to the gut. He had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that he could contain the fallout, protect himself from the inevitable whispers and speculations. "Go on," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet filled with a chilling intensity. Li shifted uneasily, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over Han Yu's shoulder. "The rumors that they say you were drugged up, that you were forced to spend the night with Miss Qi," he finished the sentence in a rush, as if the words themselves were contaminated. Han Yu's eyes narrowed. He knew that the truth, even if revealed, would be twisted and manipulated to serve the agendas of others. His family, especially. The thought of his grandfather, that cunning, manipulative old fox, using this incident to his advantage, sent a wave of cold fury through him. He had always been a pawn in the old man's games, but this was a new low. He could almost hear the old man's triumphant chuckle, feel the weight of his expectations pressing down on him, suffocating him. "And grandfather?" Han Yu asked, his voice devoid of any emotion, a perfect mask concealing the turmoil within. He didn't need to elaborate. They knew exactly what he was asking. Chen took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Boss, the old man ordered you to complete the engagement with Qi Ranran." He hesitated, bracing himself for Han Yu's reaction. "Or he'll pull his own oxygen tube." The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with unspoken tensions. Han Yu remained motionless, his expression unreadable. The threat, delivered with such theatrical flourish, was pure manipulation, yet it was effective. His grandfather knew his weaknesses, knew how to exploit his sense of duty and familial obligation. He hated the old man's games, hated the way he was always being forced to play a role in his twisted dramas. Yet, he couldn't deny the deep-seated loyalty that warred with his resentment. He was trapped, caught in a web of obligations he hadn't woven. Han Yu turned back to the window, the cityscape a blurred canvas of grays and blues. Qi Ranran. The name echoed in his mind, intertwined with the lingering scent of the drug, the memory of her soft skin against his. He had seen a flicker of defiance in her eyes, a strength that belied her apparent vulnerability. He had been drawn to it, intrigued despite himself. He wondered what she was thinking now, how she was coping with the aftermath of their forced intimacy. He had been her captor, yet he had also been a victim, just like her. He closed his eyes, trying to push away the conflicting emotions that clawed at him. Anger, frustration, and a strange, unsettling sense of responsibility. He had been used, manipulated, but so had she. He couldn't undo what had happened, but perhaps, just perhaps, he could find a way to turn this to their advantage. He could play the role his grandfather had assigned him, but he would do it on his own terms. He would marry Qi Ranran, not because of his grandfather's ultimatum, but because it was the only way to protect her, and perhaps, in the process, find a way to break free from the suffocating grip of his family. He turned back to his associates, a new resolve hardening his gaze. "Prepare the necessary arrangements," he said, his voice calm and steady, "we will proceed with the engagement." Chen and Li exchanged surprised glances. They had expected an outburst, a display of anger. Instead, they saw a cold, calculating determination that sent a shiver down their spines. They had served Han Yu long enough to know that this calm exterior masked a storm of emotions. And they knew, with a chilling certainty, that someone was about to pay the price for crossing him. Han Yu wasn't just playing his grandfather's game anymore. He was changing the rules. The biting chill of the night air did little to soothe the burning in Chi Ranran's lungs. Each ragged breath was a victory, a testament to her escape. The city lights blurred as she stumbled through the unfamiliar streets, the opulent facade of Han Yu's home receding into the distance. She had been so close to freedom. The drug had left a lingering fog in her mind, a dizzying disorientation that amplified the fear clawing at her throat. He had drugged her. Han Yu, the man her family had so eagerly thrust her towards. A forced engagement, a gilded cage. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. She pressed her hand against her stomach, willing herself to keep moving. A black car screeched to a halt beside her, its headlights momentarily blinding. Two men emerged, their movements swift and precise, their faces etched with grim determination. Panic flared, hot and sharp. She tried to run, but her legs felt heavy, unresponsive. Before she could scream, a hand clamped over her mouth, stifling the cry. "Easy now, Miss Chi," a gruff voice murmured. "We're just taking you home." Home. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. Han Yu's home. Her prison. She struggled against their hold, a desperate, futile fight against the inevitable. The world tilted, and darkness swallowed her whole. The opulent study reeked of old money and unspoken power. Zhou Haid, a man whose very presence commanded respect, paced the length of the room, his face a mask of barely contained impatience. He ran a hand through his thinning silver hair, a gesture that betrayed the turmoil beneath his composed exterior. "Already found the lady," he barked into the phone, his voice raspy with age and anxiety. "Her name is Chi Ranran. In Lashi." He paused, his breath catching in his throat. 25 years. A lifetime of searching, of guilt and regret. 25 years I finally found it. The words were barely a whisper, heavy with the weight of unspoken grief. "Go, bring the lady back." He disconnected the call, his hand trembling slightly as he lowered the phone. He stared out the window at the sprawling city below, a vast, indifferent landscape that mirrored the emptiness within him. His granddaughter. His lost granddaughter. Finally, after all these years, he would have her back. Han Yu stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker like fallen stars. The events of the evening played out in his mind, a disjointed reel of confusion and unease. Chi Ranran's face, etched with fear and defiance, haunted him. He had been a pawn in his family's game, a tool to secure their position. He had never intended to hurt her, but the situation had spiraled out of control. He ran a hand through his hair, a wave of self-disgust washing over him. He had seen the fear in her eyes, the raw, visceral terror that mirrored his own growing unease. He had been trapped in a web of lies and deceit, and he had inadvertently dragged her into it. He heard the commotion downstairs, the muffled voices and hurried footsteps. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that it was her. Chi Ranran awoke to the familiar suffocating opulence of Han Yu's home. The room spun, the heavy drapes and ornate furniture blurring at the edges of her vision. She was back in the gilded cage. Despair threatened to consume her. She sat up, her head throbbing, and looked around the room, searching for an escape, a weapon, anything. Her gaze landed on a heavy crystal vase on the bedside table. She considered it for a moment, weighing its potential as a weapon against the inevitable consequences. Before she could act, the door opened, and Han Yu entered. His expression was unreadable, a carefully constructed mask that concealed the turmoil she sensed beneath. "You're awake," he said, his voice low and even. He approached her cautiously, as if she were a wild animal poised to strike. Ranran glared at him, her silence a tangible barrier between them. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice hoarse. "Why are you doing this?" Han Yu hesitated, his gaze flickering away from hers. It's complicated, he said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. He could see the disbelief in her eyes, the hardening of her expression. He knew he deserved her scorn, her hatred. Complicated? Ran repeated, her voice laced with bitter irony. Drugging me, imprisoning me, that's complicated? Han Yu opened his mouth to speak, to offer some semblance of an explanation, but the words caught in his throat. He knew any excuse would sound pathetic, a flimsy justification for his actions. Before he could speak, a commotion erupted downstairs. Raised voices, sharp and urgent, cut through the tense silence of the room. Both Ran and Han Yu turned towards the door, their expressions mirroring a shared sense of foreboding. The door burst open, and a group of men entered, their faces grim. At the center stood Zhou Haid, his eyes fixed on Qi Ran with an intensity that made her heart pound. He approached her, his steps slow and deliberate, and stopped before her, his gaze searching her face. Qi Ran, he said, his voice trembling slightly. My granddaughter. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Ran stared at him, her mind reeling. Grandfather? This powerful, imposing man was her grandfather. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, the cryptic phone calls, the hushed whispers, the forced engagement. It was all connected. She had been a pawn in a much larger game, a game she was only beginning to understand. Han Yu watched the scene unfold, his confusion mirroring Ran's. He had no idea who this man was, or what his connection to Ran could be. He felt a growing unease, a sense that the ground beneath his feet was shifting. Qi Shunning arrived at Han Yu's home, her heart pounding with anticipation. She had received a cryptic message, summoning her urgently. She had no idea what awaited her, but she sensed, with a thrill of excitement, that it was something significant. As she entered the study, she saw Qi Ran standing beside Zhou Haid, his arm around her shoulders. The sight sent a jolt of jealousy through her. She had been so close to securing the Han family's favor, to marrying Han Yu and solidifying her position. And now, it was all slipping away. Zhou Haid turned to address the room, his voice commanding attention. This is my granddaughter, Qi Ran, he announced, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces. The rightful heir to the Zhou fortune. The words hit Qi Shunning like a physical blow. Her carefully constructed plans, her meticulously crafted manipulations, all crumbled to dust. She stared at Qi Ran, her eyes burning with hatred. It wasn't fair. It should have been her. Ran looked at Zhou Haid, then at the shocked faces around her, and a slow smile spread across her face. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued her began to dissipate, replaced by a newfound sense of power. She had been a victim, a pawn in their games. But now, the game had changed. She held the winning hand. She looked at Han Yu, his expression a mixture of confusion and something else, something that looked almost like admiration. The thought sent a strange flicker of warmth through her. She had underestimated him. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to him than she had initially thought. It seems, she said, her voice clear and steady, that the game has just begun. The throbbing in her temple was a relentless drumbeat against the fragile cage of her skull. Qi Ran pressed a cool hand against her forehead, each breath a shallow victory against the lingering effects of the drug. She could still taste the bitter tang of betrayal, a metallic aftertaste on her tongue. The blurry memories of her abduction, the suffocating darkness, and the chilling realization of Han Yu's involvement clawed at the edges of her consciousness. He played the role of rescuer so convincingly. The thought twisted in her gut, a nauseating blend of anger and a strange, unwelcome flicker of disappointment. She had allowed herself, however briefly, to believe in his sincerity. Fool. The opulent ballroom shimmered around her, a gilded cage of its own. The air hung thick with the perfume of lilies and the murmur of polite conversation, a stark contrast to the grim reality that lay beneath the surface. This engagement party, meant to celebrate her union with Hanyu, now felt like a macabre joke. Her stomach churned. This wasn't a celebration, it was a public execution of her freedom. Across the room, she saw Qi Shunning, her half-sister, basking in the reflected glory of the Han family's attention. A triumphant smirk played on Shunning's lips, a venomous bloom against her perfectly applied lipstick. She thinks she's won. Ranran's fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne flute. The cool glass offered a small measure of comfort, a tangible anchor in the swirling sea of her thoughts. Let her bask. The game isn't over. The revelation of her true identity, her connection to the Zhou family, had given her a weapon. Old Zhou, her grandfather, a man she'd only just met, had looked at her with a mixture of sorrow and fierce protectiveness that resonated deep within her. It was a connection she hadn't known she craved, a sense of belonging that had been absent for her entire life. And now, it was her shield. A shadow fell over her. Enjoying the party? Han Yu's voice was low, laced with a tension she couldn't quite decipher. Ran turned, her gaze steady. I prefer my celebrations without the added bonus of kidnapping and forced confinement. Her voice, though quiet, carried a sharp edge that sliced through the pleasantries of the surrounding conversations. A flicker of something unreadable crossed Han Yu's face. Regret? Annoyance? She couldn't be sure. He opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off. Don't bother with apologies, Han Yu, she said, her voice laced with ice. Your family's machinations are transparent. His jaw tightened. My family, he began, but she silenced him with a raised hand. Your family, she repeated, her voice dripping with disdain, who drugged me, held me captive, and now parades me around like a prize pony. You're a part of this, Han Yu. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. He flinched, his eyes momentarily losing their carefully constructed composure. For a fraction of a second, she saw a glimpse of the man she had almost believed in, the man who had rescued her from the initial abduction. But the vulnerability vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of cool indifference. He's a better actor than I gave him credit for. You misunderstand, he began, but Ran had had enough. She turned her back on him, her gaze sweeping across the ballroom until it landed on old Zhou. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. Ran lifted her chin slightly, a silent signal. She saw his eyes narrow in understanding. He began to move towards them, his presence radiating an aura of quiet power that shifted the atmosphere in the room. Panic flickered in Han Yu's eyes. He reached out as if to stop her, but she sidestepped him with a grace that surprised even herself. Grandfather, she said, her voice clear and strong, as old Zhou reached her side. The two words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The murmurs around them intensified, the polite facade cracking under the weight of the unspoken question. Old Zhou placed a hand on her arm, a gesture of possession and protection. He looked at Han Yu, his gaze sharp and assessing. Young man, old Zhou's voice was deceptively gentle, yet carried the weight of years of command. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Han Yu's face paled. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, struggling to find words. Qi Shunning, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror, pushed her way through the crowd. Grandfather, there must be some mistake, she stammered, her voice trembling. This is Ran, my sister. Old Zhou's gaze shifted to Shunning, his expression hardening. There is no mistake, he said, his voice now laced with steel. This is Qi Ran, my granddaughter, and the rightful heir to the Zhou fortune. The silence that followed was absolute. The music stopped. The clinking of glasses ceased. Every eye in the room was fixed on them. Ran Ran met their gazes, her chin held high. The fear that had been a constant companion for the past few hours had receded, replaced by a surge of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Power. She looked at Hanyu, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. The game, Hanyu, she thought, has just begun. She would not be a pawn in their games any longer. She would rewrite the rules. She would have her revenge. And perhaps, just perhaps, she would find something more amidst the wreckage. Han Xiaofei watched the scene unfold from the sidelines, his eyes narrowed, a calculating glint in their depths. This unexpected turn of events, it was a complication, certainly. But complications, he knew, could also be opportunities. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, the amber liquid burning a path down his throat. Interesting, he thought, his gaze fixed on Qi Ranran. Very interesting. The opulent ballroom shimmered, a dizzying kaleidoscope of crystal chandeliers and silken gowns. The air, thick with the perfume of lilies and the murmur of polite conversation, felt suffocating. Qi Ranran stood amidst the glittering throng, a fragile porcelain doll in a sea of sharks. Her smile, meticulously practiced, felt brittle against her lips. Beneath the elegant facade, her mind raced, a whirlwind of fear and calculation. She touched the jade pendant hidden beneath her dress, a small, cold comfort in the opulent prison. Escape, the word echoed in her thoughts, a constant drumbeat against the forced pleasantries. How could she, drugged and manipulated, have ended up here, engaged to the very man who had held her captive? Hanyu. The name itself tasted like ash in her mouth. He stood across the room, a detached observer amidst the celebratory chaos. His eyes, dark and unreadable, met hers for a fleeting moment, sending a shiver down her spine. Was it guilt she saw? Or something else entirely? The saccharine voice of her stepmother, Li Meilin, cut through her thoughts. Ran Ran, darling, aren't you thrilled? The Han family is so prestigious. The words dripped with false affection, each syllable a barbed hook. Ran Ran's grip on her champagne flute tightened. Thrilled? The word felt obscene. Of course, mother, she replied, her voice a carefully modulated mask of obedience. Inside, a cold fury simmered. This charade, this orchestrated betrayal, would not go unpunished. Qi Shunning, her half-sister, materialized at her side, her eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. Sister dear, you look pale. Are you perhaps overwhelmed by your good fortune? Ran Ran saw the barely concealed glow in her eyes, the unspoken I should be the one standing there. The casual cruelty was a familiar sting. Ran Ran forced a laugh, light and airy. Just a little tired, Shunning. All this excitement. You won't be smiling for long, she thought, the words a venomous whisper in her mind. Suddenly, the room fell silent. Old Zhou, her grandfather, stood at the entrance, his presence commanding immediate attention. Ran Ran's heart pounded against her ribs. This was it. Her one chance. He hadn't seen her since she was a child, stolen away by her father. Would he recognize her? He scanned the room, his gaze sharp and unwavering, finally settling on her. Time seemed to stretch, each second a painful eternity. Then, his eyes widened, a flicker of recognition sparking in their depths. Ran Ran, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The single word shattered the carefully constructed illusion. Li Meilin's face paled, her carefully crafted smile crumbling. Qi Shunning's eyes darted between Ran Ran and old Zhou, a dawning horror in their depths. Grandfather, Ran Ran acknowledged, her voice clear and steady, discarding the pretense of fragility. The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers. Li Meilin stammered, her words a desperate attempt to regain control. Father, there must be some mistake. This is Ran Ran, my stepdaughter. Old Zhou cut her off, his voice ringing with authority. "There is no mistake. This is my granddaughter, Zhou Ranran. The rightful heir to the Zhou fortune." The words hung in the air, a death knell to Li Meilin and Qi Shunning's ambitions. The chaos that followed was a blur of accusations, denials, and stunned silence. Ranran watched the scene unfold, a strange detachment settling over her. It was as if she were watching a play, the actors' puppets dancing to a script she was only beginning to understand. Amidst the turmoil, Han Yu approached, his expression unreadable. "Ranran," he began, his voice low and hesitant. Ranran cut him off, her voice laced with ice. Don't pretend you didn't know who I was. Your family's charade is over." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Han Yu flinched, his eyes momentarily betraying a flicker of pain. He opened his mouth to speak, but Ranran turned away, unable to bear the sight of him. A hand gently touched her arm. She turned to see Gu Chang'an, his presence a calming anchor in the storm. "It's time to go," he murmured, his voice a soothing balm to her frayed nerves. He had been her silent protector, her confidant throughout this ordeal. Without a word, she followed him, weaving through the stunned crowd, leaving the wreckage of her former life behind. As they reached the exit, a commotion erupted behind them. Han Xiaofei, Han Yu's brother, blocked their path, his face contorted in rage. "You can't leave." The engagement, Han Yu's voice cut through the air, sharp and decisive. "Let her go, Xiaofei." He stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Ranran. "This was all a lie. My illness a fabrication to force this engagement. I won't be a part of it." The confession, delivered with a raw honesty, stunned Ranran. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her. Disbelief. Anger. A flicker of something else. She met his gaze, her own emotions a turbulent mix of relief and resentment. "Then why?" she whispered, the question barely audible. He hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "Because," he began, his voice barely a whisper, even amidst the lies, there was something real. He didn't elaborate, but the unspoken words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ranran tore her gaze away, her heart pounding a chaotic rhythm against her ribs. She couldn't process it, couldn't reconcile the man who had held her captive with the man who now stood before her, confessing his family's deceit. Gu Chang'an gently steered her towards the waiting car, leaving Han Yu standing amidst the ruins of his family's machinations. As the car sped away, Ranran leaned back against the cool leather, the city lights blurring past. She closed her eyes, the events of the evening replaying in her mind. She was free. Free from the forced engagement, free from her family's manipulations. But a new uncertainty, a new complexity had entered her life, embodied in the enigmatic figure of Han Yu. The truth, she realized, was far more tangled and dangerous than she could have ever imagined. And she was just beginning to unravel it. The opulent Zhou family manor stood silhouetted against the twilight sky, a monolith of marble and glass. Inside, the air hummed with a quiet efficiency, servants gliding through hallways adorned with priceless art. Qi Ranran, still reeling from the rapid unraveling of her life, stood at the threshold of this new reality, her hand resting on the cool, polished wood of the doorframe. Just hours ago, she had been a captive, her future a terrifying blank canvas painted with the cruel strokes of forced obligation. Now, a dizzying array of possibilities stretched before her. The faint scent of sandalwood and jasmine hung in the air, a stark contrast to the sterile, chemical odor that had clung to her in that suffocating room. She closed her eyes for a moment, willing the tremor in her hands to cease. Han Yu, the name echoed in her mind, a discordant note in the otherwise harmonious melody of this grand house. His face, a mask of conflicting emotions, flashed before her inner eye. Had he truly been her captor, or a pawn in a larger game? The question clung to her, a persistent burr beneath the surface of her newfound composure. A gentle hand touched her shoulder. Ran opened her eyes to see a kind, elderly face etched with concern. It was the same woman who had escorted her from the hospital, her presence a reassuring constant in the swirling vortex of events. "Miss Chi," the woman murmured, her voice soft as silk, "Old Master Zhou is waiting for you." Ran nodded, her throat suddenly tight. "Old Master Zhou, my grandfather." The words felt foreign, yet strangely fitting. She followed the woman through the labyrinthine corridors, each step echoing the seismic shift within her. The weight of her past, the burden of her forced engagement, the bitter taste of betrayal all seemed to momentarily recede, replaced by a nascent sense of anticipation, a flicker of hope in the desolate landscape of her heart. They reached a pair of imposing double doors, intricately carved with scenes of mythical creatures. The woman paused, her hand hovering over the gilded handles. "He's been waiting a long time to meet you," she said, her eyes meeting Ran's with a depth of understanding that surprised her. Ran swallowed, a sudden wave of nervousness washing over her. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a reunion, a reconciliation with a past she had never known. It was the key to unlocking a future she could scarcely imagine. The doors swung open, revealing a spacious study bathed in the warm glow of a setting sun. A figure sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his back to the entrance. He slowly turned, his gaze settling on Ran. Time seemed to stretch, each second a lifetime as she took in his features. He was older than she had pictured, his face lined with the wisdom of years, yet his eyes held a spark of vitality, a hint of the power that had built this empire. He looked at her, not with pity or condescension, but with a profound sense of recognition. A lump formed in Ran's throat. She had spent her life feeling like a stray piece of a puzzle, never quite fitting in. Now, standing before this man, she felt a strange sense of belonging, a connection that transcended blood and circumstance. "You," she began, her voice barely a whisper. The words caught in her throat, choked by the emotions that surged within her. She took a shaky breath, gathering her composure. "You say I'm your granddaughter and you're the richest man in the country." A wry smile touched her lips, a fragile shield against the vulnerability that threatened to overwhelm her. "Grandpa finally found you." Zhou Haid rose from his chair, his movements surprisingly agile for his age. He crossed the room towards her, his eyes never leaving hers. Ran, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My Ran." He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he cupped her face. "I've searched for you for so long." The dam within Ran finally broke. Tears streamed down her cheeks, a mixture of relief, disbelief, and a grief for the years lost. She leaned into his touch, the warmth of his hand a balm to her wounded spirit. "This is real," she thought, "this is happening." In that moment, the complexities of her situation, the machinations of Qi shunning, the enigmatic presence of Han Yu all faded into the background. All that mattered was the man standing before her, the grandfather she had never known, the family she had finally found. He led her to a plush armchair, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Tell me about the life they stole from you." As Ran spoke, the story of her life poured out of her, a torrent of suppressed emotions and buried truths. She spoke of her mother's struggles, of Qi Shunning's relentless cruelty, of the forced engagement, of the drugged haze and the terrifying escape. With each word, a weight lifted from her shoulders, replaced by a growing sense of empowerment. This wasn't just a confession, it was a testimony, a declaration of her resilience, her strength, her unwavering spirit. Zhou Haid listened intently, his expression hardening with each revelation. When she finished, he sat in silence for a moment, his eyes fixed on the intricate patterns of the Persian rug beneath his feet. The room crackled with unspoken anger, a silent promise of retribution. He looked up at Ran Ran, his gaze now sharp and unwavering. "They will pay," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Every single one of them." A shiver ran down Ran Ran's spine. This wasn't just the gentle grandfather she had briefly embraced, this was a man of immense power, a force to be reckoned with. And that power was now on her side. A slow smile spread across her face, a smile that held no trace of vulnerability, only a cold, hard determination. The game had changed. She was no longer a pawn, she was a player. And she was ready to play. The revenge she had craved, the justice she had been denied, were now within her reach. She looked at her grandfather, her eyes mirroring his steely resolve. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and clear. "They will." The long-awaited dawn of her new life had finally arrived, and with it, the promise of a reckoning. The opulent ballroom shimmered, a dizzying kaleidoscope of crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes. The air, thick with the perfume of lilies and the murmur of polite conversation, felt suffocating to Chi Ran Ran. Just hours ago, she had been drugged, a prisoner in her own life. Now, she stood here, the supposed bride-to-be of Han Yu, a man she barely knew, a man who had been her captor. Her hand, clasped in his, felt alien, yet a strange current, a nervous energy, thrummed beneath her skin. "He knows," she thought, her gaze meeting his across the crowded room. "He knows about the drug, about my escape." The thought was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. Han Yu's expression was unreadable, a carefully constructed mask of polite indifference. But Ran Ran noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw, the flicker of something unidentifiable in his dark eyes. It was a look that mirrored her own inner turmoil. He, too, was trapped in this charade, bound by the invisible strings of family expectation and unspoken agreements. The engagement announcement echoed through the room, followed by a ripple of applause. Ran Ran felt a surge of nausea. Qi Shunning, radiant in a shimmering gown, stood beside Han Xiaofei, her half-sister's triumph a thinly veiled dagger aimed directly at Ran Ran's heart. "She thinks she's won," Ran Ran thought, a cold fire igniting in her chest. "She thinks she has everything." But Ran Ran had a secret weapon, a truth that would shatter Shunning's carefully constructed facade. "A toast," old Zhou's voice boomed across the room, cutting through the celebratory chatter. His eyes, sharp and knowing, met Ran Ran's. He raised his glass, a faint smile playing on his lips. "To my granddaughter, Qi Ran Ran, and her future happiness." The room fell silent. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Qi Shunning's carefully crafted smile faltered, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Han Xiaofei's eyes narrowed, suspicion clouding his features. Ran Ran allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to grace her lips. The game had changed. "Grandfather," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I appreciate your sentiment. However, there seems to be a slight misunderstanding." She turned to face Han Yu, her gaze unwavering. "This engagement," she continued, her voice laced with a newfound authority, "was predicated on a lie. A lie orchestrated by Qi Shunning, who conveniently omitted the fact that I am the true heir to the Zhou fortune, the granddaughter old Zhou has been searching for." The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers and gasps. Han Yu's hand tightened around hers, his grip almost painful. She could feel the tension radiating from him, the conflict raging within him. Ran Ran continued, her voice rising above the din. "Qi Shunning, driven by greed and ambition, sought to steal my identity, my birthright, and my future. She manipulated events, using deceit and subterfuge to secure this engagement for herself." Ran Ran paused, letting her words sink in. The silence that followed was thick with anticipation. "However," she added, her voice dripping with icy resolve, "I will not be a pawn in her game." Qi Shunning's face was ashen, her carefully applied makeup unable to conceal the panic in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, to deny, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. "Grandfather," Ran said, turning back to old Joe, "I believe this engagement should be reconsidered." Old Joe's eyes twinkled with amusement. He surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on Hanyu, before settling back on Ran. "Indeed," he said, his voice laced with authority. "I believe it should." The hours that followed were a blur of hushed conversations, hurried phone calls, and shifting alliances. The carefully orchestrated engagement party dissolved into chaos as the truth of Ran's identity reverberated through the room. Chi Shunning, stripped of her fabricated status, became a pariah, her desperate pleas falling on deaf ears. Han Xiaofei, his plans thwarted, retreated into the shadows, his resentment simmering beneath the surface. In the midst of the upheaval, Ran found herself drawn to a quiet corner of the balcony, the cool night air a welcome reprieve from the stifling atmosphere of the ballroom. Hanyu followed her, his silence heavy with unspoken questions. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Ran turned to face him, her heart pounding against her ribs. The moonlight illuminated his face, revealing the vulnerability she had glimpsed earlier. "I didn't trust you," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought you were part of it, part of their scheme." Han Yu's expression softened, a hint of sadness flickering in his eyes. "I understand," he said, his voice laced with regret. "My family, they can be persuasive." He paused, searching for the right words. "But believe me, Ran, I had no idea about Shunning's deception. When I learned the truth about the drug about you," his voice trailed off, leaving the unspoken words hanging in the air. Ran studied his face, searching for any sign of falsehood. But there was none. Only a raw honesty that resonated with her own fractured soul. "I believe you," she whispered, the words barely audible. And in that moment, amidst the wreckage of deceit and betrayal, a fragile connection formed. A spark of something real and unexpected ignited between them. The future remained uncertain, a tangled web of unanswered questions and unresolved conflicts. But for the first time since this ordeal began, Ran felt a flicker of hope, a sense of control over her own destiny. She had exposed the lies, reclaimed her identity, and perhaps, just perhaps, found something worth fighting for. The opulent living room of the Han residence felt like a cage. Chi Ran stood rigidly, the lingering effects of the drug a dull ache behind her eyes, yet her mind raced. Han Yu, the man she was supposed to marry against her will, the man who had initially held her captive, stood beside her, a silent, imposing figure. He was an enigma wrapped in a tailored suit, his eyes an unsettling mix of apology and something else. Something she couldn't quite decipher. Was it guilt? Or perhaps a flicker of the same anger that simmered within her? She swallowed, the dryness in her throat a constant reminder of her ordeal. She had to end this charade, expose the puppet masters pulling the strings of her life. "I believe it's time we had a family discussion," Ran stated, her voice remarkably steady despite the turmoil within. She met Han Yu's gaze, a silent challenge passing between them. He gave a curt nod, his jaw tight. He moved with a predator's grace, pulling back the heavy drapes to reveal the sprawling city lights. The cityscape glittered with a cold, indifferent beauty, mirroring the hollowness she felt inside. Chi Shunning entered the room, her smile saccharine sweet, a stark contrast to the venomous thoughts Ran knew lurked beneath. She felt a surge of revulsion, a bitter taste rising in her mouth. This woman, my own sister, orchestrated my drugging, my captivity. The realization was a physical blow. Shunning's eyes flickered with a hint of unease as she took in Ran's composed demeanor. Had she expected a broken, weeping mess? Ran allowed a small, icy smile to play on her lips. She would give them a performance they wouldn't forget. Han Xiaofei followed, his arrogance radiating from him like heat from a furnace. He glanced at Ran Ran with open disdain, then at his brother with something akin to triumph. He clearly believed he had won. Ran Ran felt a cold rage ignite within her. They thought her a pawn in their game, a helpless victim. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Old Zhou, her grandfather, her newly discovered family, entered last. His eyes, though aged, held a sharp intelligence, assessing the room, taking in the tense atmosphere. Ran Ran's heart ached with a strange mix of longing and resentment. Where had he been all these years? Why had he allowed her to suffer? Yet, seeing him here, a bastion of strength, sparked a flicker of hope. I believe we all know why we are here, Ran Ran began, her voice ringing with newfound authority. She held their gazes, letting the silence hang heavy in the air, each tick of the grandfather clock a hammer blow against the facade of normalcy they tried to maintain. The charade is over. Shunning's carefully constructed mask of innocence crumbled. Ran Ran, what are you talking about? This is your wedding day. You should be happy. Her voice dripped with false concern. Ran Ran laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the opulent room. Happy? Drugged and forced into a marriage I don't want? I think not. She turned to Han Yu, her gaze piercing. Tell them, Han Yu. Tell them about your little misunderstanding. Han Yu shifted, his jaw clenching. The silence stretched, taut and uncomfortable. Ran Ran could see the internal battle raging within him. He had a choice to make. Stand with his manipulative family or align himself with the woman he had wronged. The air crackled with anticipation. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. There was no misunderstanding. My family orchestrated this arrangement. They believed it was in their best interest. He looked directly at his brother, the unspoken accusation hanging heavy between them. Xiaofei sputtered, his face contorting with rage. You dare betray us? After everything we've done for you? You betrayed me first, Han Yu retorted, his voice laced with steel. He turned to old Zhou, his expression unreadable. Grandfather, I believe you have something to say. Old Zhou stepped forward, his presence commanding the room. Ran Ran is my granddaughter, the rightful heir to the Zhou fortune. This forced engagement is an insult, an attempt to steal what is rightfully hers. He fixed Shunning with a chilling stare. Your machinations end now. Shunning's face paled. The carefully constructed foundation of her ambition crumbled around her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out, only a strangled gasp. Ran Ran felt a sense of vindication wash over her. It was a bittersweet victory. The truth was out, but the scars of betrayal remained. She looked at Han Yu, a question in her eyes. He met her gaze, a flicker of vulnerability in his expression. Perhaps, she thought, there was more to this man than she initially believed. Perhaps, beneath the layers of family obligation and deception, there was a spark of something real. The engagement is off, old Zhou declared, his voice ringing with finality. He turned to Ran Ran, his eyes softening. You are free, my dear. Free to make your own choices, to forge your own path. Ran Ran drew a deep breath, the weight of the past few days lifting slightly. She was free. But what did freedom mean now? She looked at Han Yu, his presence a silent question mark in the room. The future stretched before her, uncertain, yet filled with a strange sense of possibility. The game had changed. And Ran Ran was ready to play. The remnants of the evening's chaos clung to the air, a faint scent of jasmine and something acrid, like burnt sugar. Han Yu's house, a stark modern structure of glass and steel, felt colder now, the sleek surfaces reflecting the fractured emotions swirling within its walls. Ran sat perched on the edge of a minimalist sofa, the plush fabric a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside her. Her escape, the revelation of Han Yu's identity, her own hidden lineage, it was a dizzying cascade of events that left her feeling strangely detached, as if watching her own life unfold from a distance. She traced the rim of a teacup, the porcelain cool against her fingertips, her gaze fixed on the swirling leaves within. Had it only been hours ago she was trapped, drugged, her future a terrifying blank canvas? Han Yu entered the room, his footsteps measured and quiet, a stark contrast to the tempest she knew raged within him. He carried a tray with a fresh pot of tea and 2 cups, the delicate clinking of porcelain a fragile counterpoint to the silence that hung heavy between them. He set the tray down on a low table and sat opposite her, the distance between them feeling vast and unbridgeable. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, held a flicker of something else now: vulnerability? Regret? Ran found it difficult to decipher. He began, his voice rough, as if unused. He cleared his throat and started again. I understand if you can't forgive me. For what my family, for what I did. He looked away, his jaw clenched. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected the cold, calculated way she'd used his family's secrets against them. He hadn't expected the flicker of steel in her eyes, the quiet strength that radiated from her. It both terrified and captivated him. Ran studied him, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Anger, certainly, for the fear and humiliation she'd endured. But beneath that, a flicker of something else. Intrigue? Perhaps even understanding. She had seen a glimpse of the man beneath the mask, the vulnerability he so desperately tried to conceal. He was a pawn in his family's game, just as she had been. Forgive? She echoed, her voice soft, almost a whisper. She tilted her head, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. Perhaps. But forgiveness is a luxury I can't afford right now. Survival, that's my priority. Her words hung in the air, sharp and precise, each syllable a carefully placed stone in the foundation of her new reality. Han Yu met her gaze, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected tears, accusations, maybe even hysterics. Not this chillingly calm assessment of their situation. What do you propose? A truce, Ran said, her voice gaining strength. A marriage of convenience. We both have something to gain. The words felt strange on her tongue, a stark departure from the romantic fantasies she'd once harbored. But this wasn't a fairy tale. This was survival. Han Yu leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. And what, precisely, do you gain? Ran's smile widened, a hint of steel in its curve. Protection. Power. And the opportunity to dismantle the very foundation that sought to destroy me. She saw a flicker of admiration in his eyes, a spark of respect that hadn't been there before. He considered her words, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken understanding. He knew the machinations of his family, the ruthless pursuit of power that fueled their every action. He, too, was a prisoner of their ambition. And me? He finally asked, his voice low. Freedom, Ran replied, her gaze unwavering. From the expectations, the manipulations. A chance to forge your own path. She paused, her voice softening. And perhaps even love. The word hung in the air, fragile and uncertain, yet imbued with a strange power. Han Yu's breath hitched. Love. A concept he had always viewed with cynicism, a weakness to be exploited. Yet, looking into Ran's eyes, he felt a stirring within him, a flicker of something he hadn't dared to acknowledge before. Love, he echoed, the word foreign on his tongue. Perhaps, Ran repeated, her eyes holding his. But that, she added, a mischievous glint in her eyes, is a game we play later. A slow smile spread across Han Yu's face, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, transforming his features. Agreed. We have a marriage to orchestrate, a family to dismantle, and a future to build. Together. The weight of the past few days seemed to lift from Ranran's shoulders, replaced by a strange sense of exhilaration. This was not the future she had envisioned, but it was a future she could control. She had been a pawn, a victim. Now, she was a player. The details of their plan unfolded slowly, each word carefully chosen, each strategy meticulously crafted. They spoke of alliances, of manipulations, of using their newfound knowledge to their advantage. Ranran revealed her true identity as Zhou Hei's granddaughter, the missing heiress, and together, they plotted to use this revelation to solidify their position and expose Qi shunning schemes. As they talked, a strange intimacy settled between them, forged not in shared vulnerability, but in shared ambition. They were two broken pieces, each seeking a way to mend, finding solace in the jagged edges that fit together so perfectly. The initial distrust and animosity slowly melted away, replaced by a grudging respect, a shared understanding of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of their world. The night wore on, the city lights twinkling outside the panoramic windows, casting a surreal glow on their clandestine meeting. They were conspirators, allies, bound by a shared desire for revenge and a burgeoning attraction that neither dared to name. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, Ranran felt a strange sense of peace. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued her were gone, replaced by a steely resolve. She had been broken, but she was not defeated. She had been a victim, but now she was a survivor. And in Han Yu, she had found not a savior, but a partner in crime, a fellow traveler on the treacherous path ahead. They would navigate the complexities of their forced marriage, the machinations of their families, and the tangled web of deceit that surrounded them. Together. And perhaps, just perhaps, they would find something real, something true, amidst the ruins of their shattered lives. The game had begun.